My name is Stu Abramson, and I'm the president of the Doylestown Historical Society, and it's my job to welcome you here today. It is very nice to see you. We filled up pretty much all of our chairs, and that's great. You are brave souls. I guess I'll give you a weather report first. This is our 5th outside event. Every one of them so far has been impacted by the rain, so I don't see why this one should be any different. But I would like to let you know what our program is. If you haven't gotten a written program, this is the first part of our ceremony. It will take about 35, maybe 40 minutes, and then we'll give you a chance to stretch your legs, and I will ask you to reconvene at the fountain area. It's, a 5-minute walk, if that. And I highly encourage you to make that walk, because we will have maybe a 15 or 20-minute ceremony there and actually unveil the actual fountain that we are commemorating today, along with some other very, I'm going to say this, impactful things that I know that you will enjoy. So we'll take a break at that time. Before we actually get going, I'd like to make sure that I make some announcements here, and before I do forget any of this, I want to thank our sponsors who are listed on the back of the program, but I want to particularly single out Monument Bank, who is the primary sponsor of the event. And I don't know if Chris Nardo is in the audience or not. Chris is the president of Monument Bank, and we thank him very much for his generous contribution. And in addition to Monument Bank, we have Tom and Tracy Doherty, sitting right there. Tom, his wife Tracy are major sponsors and are primarily responsible for the Quakertown band that you are hearing right now. So we thank those two individuals. Also, while I'm thanking people, the county people have been just great to us, and that really includes Chris Edwards, who is the public information officer, who's cycling around here somewhere, and Kevin Spencer, who I don't think is in the audience, but he heads up the general service group for the county, and they are responsible for putting up this tent, and for a number of other things that have really made this event possible on these grounds. And of course, our volunteers. As I mentioned, we just have a great group of people, so if you live close by and like history and love Doylestown, as most of us, I believe, in this tent, under this tent do, then you really need to join our society and help with things. And I think you'll find it is an enjoyable experience. If I did not mention it, the director of the Quakertown Band is Richard Karshner, who is leading the band. And I also at this time want to single out 2 members of Saving Hallowed Ground. Gene Hough is here somewhere, I think. He may be at the fountain now. Oh, there he is. Recognizable by his doughboy uniform. I guess his partner in crime, Barry Johnson, is not with us today, right? But one of the reasons why I want to single out Gene, who has been with us through the entire 2 months of this World War I commemoration, it is Gene primarily and his helpers, including students from the local schools, who have restored that fountain. And if you haven't noticed that fountain driving by lately, it looks really good. It looks about as good as it did in 1922 when it was first commissioned, first dedicated. And Gene is a trooper. I mean, he did this bending down with just after having knee replacement, so it had to be painful to him. He did this in February, and I was there for 1 or 2 of those sessions where the weather was really brutal, I can tell you. So, Gene, thank you very much for your help. I want to start this proceeding off correctly, and that is with the presentation of our flag. And today that will be done by the Central Bucks Detachment of the Marine Corps League. And for this I will have to consult my notes and tell you that the Marine Corps contingent is led by Bob Sundling, who is a rifle bearer, Bill McBride, who is a flag bearer, and we're talking about Ducky Hough, who is also a rifle bearer. So if you please, can I ask you to stand for the presentation of the colors and remain standing for the singing of the national anthem. March.
Detail, pull. Left, face. Breathe back, arm.
Susan Whitenack for that performance of our national anthem. I would first like to introduce Jean Rutherford. Jean is a relative of the model for the top figure of the fountain. So if you can see, that is Jean's relative. She can explain exactly what the connection is. I get lost between the marriages and the in-laws and things of that nature. But Jean is here. I can also tell you that World War I, you probably know, among other things, was known as the Forgotten War. One of the reasons why it was forgotten is because almost all the people who were alive during that war are no longer with us. However, some people are coming pretty close, and Jean is one of them. So that 95-year-old Jean Rutherford, who has been an institution in this community for some time here, and I am so honored that she is able to be with us today. And Jean, let me call you to the podium. We're going to have to make it.
Well, I am happy to be here today to join in rededicating the memorial to those who served from Company G during World War I. The fountain has always been a rather personal thing to our family. Uncle Raymond was Milton's uncle, and he and Russ Gulick were asked to pose for the sculptor William Mercer, who took photos of them in various poses and worked from the photos. It's really a local thing, since all three men were from Doylestown.
Thank you, resuming with the introduction of our special guest. Next special guest is John Hartzel. John is a relative of Russell Gulick. Russell Gulick is the bottom figure of the fountain. He was the model for that fountain. And John.
Thank you, Stu. Hello, everyone. Russell Gulick was my grandmother's brother. Russell was one of 7 children who grew up on Schule Avenue next door to the firehouse in the brick house that's still there. That's where Christopher and Emma Gulick lived along with their 7 children. And Russell was one of 4 brothers and 3 sisters. Christopher Gulick, his father, by the way, was Register of Wills in Bucks County in 1898. But in 1917, when Russ Gulick was 17 years old, he responded to the call along with the rest of the men in town who formed Company G of the 6th Pennsylvania Regiment and reported literally across the street to the armory where he was inducted into the company. He went to France, served in the most horrific battles of World War I, the Meuse-Argonne. He served in the trenches. He was a bugler in Company G, and he was gassed during World War I. Now, he survived his ordeal in World War I, survived his gassing, came back home, and lived the rest of his 42 years right here in Doylestown, right on Schule Avenue next to the courthouse. He had an interesting life his last 42 years. He served as sergeant-in-arms at the state legislature whenever the state legislature was in session. He was a notary public, and he was a concrete salesman here in Doylestown. He was literally a man's man, if you can picture a concrete salesman who just ate meat and potatoes. That was Russ Gulick. He passed away at the age of 62 in 1960. Never really talked about his service other than let his little grandnephew like me play with his bugle, his uniform, wear his uniform, and put on his helmet and play soldier back when I was a little kid. Those are my memories of Russ. But sadly, he died rather young at 62. And while I know he would have appreciated this honor very much, I know he would have been humbled, because my recollection of Russ was that he was called to do this duty, he did his job, he accomplished his mission, and came home and relived the rest of his life here in Doylestown. So thank you all for remembering him.
As John mentioned, we have Russ Gulick's bugle, we have his uniform, his helmet, his gas mask, all on display on loan from John Hartzel at the Historical Society at 56 South Main Street, and you're certainly welcome to come and see that. We are open actually on Saturdays. If you do want to come at another time, please call us up and we will make arrangements to accommodate you. We have plans for that bugle later on in this program at the fountain. So that bugle will come into use, that 100-year-old bugle, at the fountain ceremony, in fact, to close our ceremony. So once again, I encourage you to go down to that fountain for that. Next up is Martha Bateman Yager. She is the granddaughter of John Bateman. John Bateman was the sculptor of that fountain. Martha.
I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. I grew up with images of that fountain in my home, but I only saw it once as a young child. I grew up with this portrait of my grandfather that was painted by my father around the time I was born. And in the back of that are sort of images of some of the pieces of sculpture that he was most proud of, including this fountain. One of the reasons why I am particularly drawn to this fountain, and I'm so grateful that you all have cared for it in these years, is that World War I was a horrible nightmare for those that participated in it. And this memorial is a memorial of that, of the terrible human cost of war. It's not a memorial of generals on horses. It's the men who did the service, who gave their lives and did what they felt they had to do to try to make a better place for all of us. And it came at great cost, and I'm very grateful for that image is treasured by this community. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last special guest is Barbara Schoellkopf. Barbara is related to Harriet Atkinson. Harriet Atkinson was one of the people who unveiled the original fountain in 1922. She is also related to the Atkinson family, which is a familiar name in Doylestown. Barbara.
I think Sue stole all my good lines. I grew up with 3 of the 4 Atkinson brothers that served in World War I, and it was a delight. And like Sue said, my Aunt Harriet also dedicated this war memorial when it was originally done. I hope that when people walk by or ride by these monuments that are scattered around the courthouse, they also remember all the men and women who have served and are still serving this country, and I thank them.
Very nice. So, our first speaker this afternoon will be Lieutenant Colonel John Shepard. John made a career as an Army infantry officer. He is a military historian, and he is a lecturer at Delaware Valley University Continuing Education Department. Colonel Shepard.
Thank you, Stu. A comment on our last speaker. One of the wonderful things about being a historian is you get to know some of the characters that you're studying to the point where you begin to know them. And I've got to say that the Atkinson family probably has the record. Atkinsons held, I believe, every possible rank and position in G Company of the 6th and then later G Company of the 111th after World War I. A family with a tremendous, tremendous service record. We're here today to rededicate a memorial that was erected 95 years ago. The memorial recognizes sacrifices made in a war whose significance could not have been realized by those who assembled for the dedication in 1922. Indeed, veterans and townsfolk alike would have said to you that day that they were anxious to get back to their normal lives, to the way it was before the war. They were too close to what had happened and could not perceive that what they had done had changed the world. Today, we recognize the First World War as a turning point, a hinge in history for Doylestown, the nation, and the world. Before 1914, the United States was an inward-focused regional power, much quieter than it is today, far removed from the power politics of Europe. Our leaders showed little interest in the activities of the great powers, and those powers in turn gave little consideration to the underarmed Americans. By early 1917, that was changing. The great European war had raged on indecisively for 2.5 years. Despite immense expenditure of blood and treasure, neither side could gain advantage over the other. America, with her farms, factories, financial resources, and a population untouched by war, represented to the British, French, and their allies a strong potential ally. To the Central Powers, led by Germany, America was a threat to the chance of victory that their successes on the Eastern Front were beginning to open up. By the time of the armistice in 1918, the change was clear, if not publicly acknowledged by either side of the Atlantic. In 19 short months, the United States had recruited and trained a 4 million man army, transported half that force to the fighting front, and it tipped the scales, allowing the Allies to decisively outmatch the Central Powers. America's industrial base had been put on a war footing and was on the brink of producing a flood of ships, guns, and all the panoply of war. In short, America had become a, if not the, great power in world affairs. To us in 2017, all of this looks like a natural path. But to those assembled here in 1922, it was clear only that the nation had been called to a great task. Millions had joined the effort, both at home and abroad, and they had prevailed. The decisive change they had effected was as yet beyond the horizon. So we come here today to recognize men and women who enabled change, who set aside their normal lives to engage in something greater than themselves, something they might not fully have understood. Over 1,350 men and women, yes, there were women, from Doylestown and Bucks counties served in uniform during the First World War. Some were serving even before the declaration of war in April 1917. National Guardsmen, sailors, Marines, and men of the regular army were on duty. The Guard itself was deployed, had only recently returned from a deployment to the Mexican border. When war was declared, others volunteered to do their share. Harry Lloyd Coate of 369 Linden Avenue made up his mind quickly and made his way to the Navy recruiting station in Philadelphia on April 14th, 8 days after the declaration. He would serve at the Philadelphia Navy Yard for the course of the war. Albert Coates of 82 Harvey Avenue joined the Army about a week later. He would serve in the Signal Corps and would become one of the first Bucks County men to arrive in France. Others would follow. About 40% of those who served enlisted voluntarily in the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. By the end of May 1917, Congress had passed a draft law, and the process of registering began in June. There was, however, a problem. There was no place to put either the National Guard or the draftees. There were no Army camps. So starting in May 1917, there was a prodigious effort at camp building. 32 complete camps were built between May and roughly the middle of October of that year. And by September, these camps were sufficiently ready to accept the men. Doylestown's 150 National Guardsmen marched from the armory to the train station on September 12, 1917. Other guardsmen from other parts of the county left at about the same time. The members of the Guard would make up about 19% of the total number who served. Most of the Bucks County, 6 days later, the first group of draftees were also given a parade through Doylestown as they marched off to camp. Induction continued as training capacity grew in the new camps. Eventually, the draft would account for over 40% of the Bucks Countyans in uniform. Most of the Doylestown and Bucks County men, over 60% of them, would eventually serve overseas. Many would serve in frontline units, and many of those would return home physically and mentally scarred by their experience. 26 lost their lives. When we adjourn to the fountain in a short while, we'll hear their names. What should we take away when the last notes of taps fade away this afternoon? I'd suggest that we remember that 100 years ago, ordinary citizens were called to tasks of extraordinary difficulty. What they did was not exactly what they thought they were doing, but they played their part, and in so doing, bent the course of history. Thank you.
John Philip Sousa was born between the Civil War and World War I. When he was about 13 and a half years old, he was going to run away from his living in Washington, D.C., where his father played trombone in the Marine Band. But his father said, "Oh no, you're not going to run away and join the circus. You're going to join me as an apprentice in the Marine Band." At age 13 and a half, he then joined the Marine Band. At about age 21, he then came to Philadelphia to play in the centennial performances there. During the time when he was, first of all, in the Marine Band, he had written a few marches and submitted them to the conductor, who said, "No, thank you." But after that conductor had retired, they came to Sousa again and said, "Would you like to come back and be the director of the Marine Band?" And so that's what he did for many, many years. Of course, so this is the second time that he joined the military, joined the Marine Band to be the director. After some period of time, he wanted to take his band all across the world, all across the country, performing concert music. And so he left the Marines and then formed his own band. During World War I, he enlisted again as lieutenant commander in the Navy to train musicians. So some of those people that John was speaking about, all of those numbers of people who were in the war, many of them were musicians because music was so important to them. Now, We Are Coming was published in 1918 as a song, a piano piece, and a march for band. Although it does not usually appear in the catalog of marches, this specially arranged version is a combination of the piano and song versions. Although most of Sousa's music is well known, this work is obscure in all three versions. Today we know Life magazine as a premier magazine of photojournalism. Before Time Life purchased the name and changed the focus of the format. But from 1890 to 1930, Life magazine was a famous, important humor magazine. At the height of America's participation in World War I, it sponsored a contest for a poem. So we're looking at both poems and music as to how they influenced the war. A poem that was suitable for use as a war song. A lady named Edith Willis Lynn won the $500 prize and the opportunity to have the music for the song written by John Philip Sousa, who must have been thrilled. So, if Al can use a microphone, okay, we're going to play some of the music and he's going to read some of the words. I think they might be printed in your program. One of John Philip Sousa's most thrilling works, I'm sure, and this is how it goes.
From the mountains, wrenched and hoary, from the river and the plain, from the seaboard and the valley, we are marching forth again. We are coming. We are coming as the pilgrims came of yore. We will rally round old glory as our fathers did before. With no malice in our bosom, with no hate, no dream of greed, where the stricken millions be calm, where the maimed and starving bleed, we are marching, 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 in answer to the call of the justice for the nations and liberty for all.
Nostalgic mood assumed by some of those on the home front. The longing for those who are away is expressed in these various different songs. So if you take a look at your song sheets, please, and can you find there's a long, long trail. Now the band doesn't know this, but we're going to start in the middle. Okay? The double bar, right, Morris? Sure. Okay? At the side. You're on the long trail. So. Okay. Alice volunteered to be the song leader.
This was like the Army. I was volunteered. Our singer is not here today. He had to go to a funeral.
Pick up, please. Pick up and hold it, go.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Again, go. There's a wall.
A long, long trail winding into the land of my dreams, where the nightingales are singing and the white moon beams. There's a long
Some of the most popular and patriotic songs of World War I were written by George M. Cohan. Although he was pretty well known, and he was born on the 3rd of July, he claimed that he was actually born on the 4th of July and was a Yankee Doodle dandy. 2 songs were written for his Broadway shows, and they were written before the war. They were I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy, written in 1904, and You're a Grand Old Flag in 1906. Now, we've just added this as a part of the, so you don't have the words to this, but they're patriotic themes. We'll set the stage for the tune that's coming up next. Listen to this concert band version of these songs called Yankee Doodle Dandy and You're a Grand Old Flag. 117. I don't know. What? Ready? Now. So now it's 1918, and Cohan's focus has shifted from a patriotic ideal to the need for actively supporting the war effort. So our last song in this section is Over There. We will play the entire thing and give you a signal as to when to come in and sing, perhaps a familiar refrain. That's on your song sheet also.
And please join us if you can. Thank you, band. 95 years ago, when this fountain was first dedicated, the primary speaker was President Judge William Ryan, 95 years ago. Continuing that tradition, our keynote speaker today will be Bucks County President Judge Jeffrey
L. Finley. If you've been reading the local papers lately, you have read where Judge Finley has been busy lately. Judge Finley.
I kind of feel like I'm speaking at the Oscars or something with the band over here. I'm going to keep my eye on them because I'll know if I've gone too long when the band starts playing again. Stu just mentioned my predecessor, President Judge William Ryan. I read somewhere that he spoke at the dedication for 50 minutes. I won't do that to you. But let me say it's really an honor for me to have been asked to speak at the rededication of this particular monument, a monument which acknowledges the sacrifices of those from this community during World War I. I also want to really thank those people with the Historical Society and those others who did all the work to restore this monument, a monument that I think is oft forgotten or not particularly noticed within the community, whether it's its location or whatever that might be. You've heard the history both musically and through the military, and so what I would like to do is share a memory with you as a person who loves that particular fountain. Like many of you here, I grew up in Doylestown. Raised as a little kid, first on Hillside Avenue and then in Maplewood. John Hartzel and Lee Rutherford, I know he's around here someplace, we were all classmates. When we were kids here in Doylestown, and by the way, this memory is not unique to me. Those of you who lived in Doylestown in the late 50s, early 60s will have this same memory. But it's one that the dedication and rededication and restoration of this fountain really brought back to me sort of in living color, and the memories are really ingrained in my mind. There was a tradition back then on Memorial Day that there was the big parade. We'll talk about that in just a second, but before the big parade began, if you were an elementary school student like I was in Doylestown, I attended the Borough School, which is right here on now the VIP lot, Court and Broad Street. In any case, at that time, we were required to participate in what was called the Little Parade in Memorial Day. Think about that now. Required to do something on a holiday coordinated by the school and your teachers. The tradition essentially was this. On Memorial Day, you would go out to your mother's garden and pick her flowers, sometimes with her permission. We would then rush into town to the Borough School, get coordinated, organized, lined up by our teachers according to our class. And we would then march around Doylestown, primarily in front of our parents, but around the buildings here in the center of town, past all the monuments, down the hill to the Atkinson American Legion Hall, where we would hand our flowers over to be laid on the graves of veterans who were buried in Doylestown Cemetery. Then we would run back up Spruce Street, up the hill, somewhere along Court Street or wherever, and gather with our parents to watch the big parade. We would watch in awe as the veterans of the Korean War would walk by. Veterans of World War II, some of whom were our fathers. I remember particularly the excitement everyone felt, and I know I felt it, when the World War I veterans would come by. Most of them riding in cars, some proudly walking. They seemed ancient to me. In hindsight, I suspect they're really not that much older than I am today, but they were just some in uniform, but everybody. There was a buzz in the crowd when they came by. I'll be honest, at first I thought they were veterans of the Spanish-American War, until somebody pointed it out. But I still remember that today. When Judge Ryan spoke years ago, he spoke very eloquently. And I want to read a portion of his speech to you because I think it is critical that we all remember this today and tomorrow. And he was speaking now about the dedication of this particular memorial. He stated as follows: "But time will dim its details and efface the memory of the names and deeds of those who on bloody fields and on the sea, in the military service, and in the innumerable other activities in foreign lands and in this homeland wrought out this glorious result. It is also meet and proper that we of this generation should erect these memorials that shall remain to tell the story to future generations after we shall have passed away. It is the story of the American spirit that we would perpetrate." I truly believe that it was the intent of my teachers on that day on the Borough School parking lot, and as we marched around Doylestown, to instill in us that same American spirit and to make us sure we understood the sacrifices of so many. I also believe now that it is incumbent upon each of us here today to instill in our children, our grandchildren, and generations that come that same American spirit and the understanding of the sacrifices made to provide us with the freedoms we so enjoy. We must do this so that time will not dim the details nor efface the names and deeds of those who on bloody fields and on the sea and in the homeland have served so honorably and continue to do so. Those of you who have participated in this project, your restoration, your rededication, your calling attention to this oft unnoticed monument is so critical to this challenge of passing that same American spirit on to the next generation. And I commend you all for your work, and thank you.
Thank you, Judge Finley. Well, I don't know how it was for you back there, but for me it's a pretty good performance by everybody today. So thank you very much for our speakers. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, let us stand up, stretch a little bit, and make your way down to the fountain. We will reconvene in about 10 minutes or so. Ladies and gentlemen, I guess we are ready to begin the concluding part of the ceremony here today. And to start us off, let's do an invocation by Chaplain Scott Russell.
The gentlemen, please remove their hats. Let us pray. Almighty God and Heavenly Father, in your hands are the living and the dead. We give you thanks for all those, our comrades, who have laid down their lives in the service of our country. May they rest in peace, and may light perpetually shine upon them. May the good work of seeking justice for the oppressed and peace for all mankind be rewarded with success, that their sacrifices shall not have been in vain. And may we never fail to remember the awesome cost of the freedom that we enjoy. All this we ask in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain. At this time, I'd like to call on Tammy Shane, who is portraying Martha Mercer, who will tell you a little bit about the history of this fountain. Martha.
Why, thank you, Stu. Hello, I'm Martha Dana Mercer. I am the wife of William Robert Mercer Jr. next to me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of our World War I fountain. Willie's a little shy about his achievements. He did design this, so I will speak for him because I am not shy. I need a few notes, though, because I am 145 and the memory's just not what it used to be. The Great War that mercifully ended 100 years ago was not a war among nations. It was a war among people. Between men and boys fighting each other, women and children caught in the crossfire, and families back home waiting, worrying, and praying. When Willie was asked to submit a design for the fountain to make the memorial to the sacrifices made during World War I, he knew of the other efforts around the country to memorialize men and boys who fought in Europe. Even though he loved to work in concrete, he felt that this memorial required something grander, perhaps a precious metal. He did not feel a concrete tablet, or even one made of marble or granite, with simple names inscribed in it, would suffice. He also felt that the common soldier at attention statue was, again, not enough to capture the scope and the breadth. But this war forever altered the lives of not only the soldiers who fought, but the European women and children who lived in the devastation of the battlefields, and the families back home who were desperately seeking news of their loved ones. Willie knew he wanted to portray the human side of the struggle and show not only the suffering, but the courage, the humanity, and the caring that played a part in this war. To design this memorial, Willie asked two of our local boys, young Rutherford and young Gulick, to come to our home, Aldie Mansion, which is about a half-mile north up the road. He invited them to his artist studio on the estate grounds. You would know that area today as the bicycle shop in the shopping center. He constructed a rotating platform outside the studio and posed both of the boys on it, with one supporting the other in his arms and offering his comrade a precious drink of water. He took numerous photos, made numerous sketches, rotating the platform to be sure he got them from all angles. And then he drew the final design, which his good friend and fellow artist John Bateman turned into a three-dimensional masterpiece. Our local boys, Rutherford and Gulick, served as models for brotherhood and compassion. Willie wanted this memorial to represent the care and tenderness that was evident when our local Doylestown ladies, led by me, worked together to sew clothing and knit wool stockings for the refugees of Belgium and France who were left homeless through the war. Willie wanted to show the bond between the Doylestown people and their fighting men and boys of Company G when we held a send-off celebration at Aldie Mansion for those soldiers and gave them care packages that we ourselves made. Willie wanted to show the brotherly love that develops on the battlefield between soldiers, when during the fighting it comes down to usually one man caring for his brother in arms. This splendid fountain captured the humanity of war. Willie, I am so proud of your vision and your talent. And to John Bateman, our friend and Willie's fellow artist, who took Willie's vision and cast it into enduring bronze. We are thankful for John's exquisite and artistic talents, and I am so happy to meet his granddaughter who is here today, Martha. What a lovely name you have, Martha. This fountain memorial is a masterpiece indeed. It is a symbol of human compassion prevailing in the face of adversity, and I am honored to be the wife of its designer. God bless America.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. I mentioned that we had to make several adjustments to our program because of the rescheduling, and I maybe did not mention earlier that Commissioner Rob Lockery was not able to attend, so that would be one adjustment. Also, for the laying of the poppies, we lost some of our students from Central Bucks school district since school is now out. so that I will call on you in the crowd, if there are any children in particular or anyone else who would like to help us place poppies on this fountain, please come to this area here and we will fix you up with some poppies. Those two guys, I think, will like to help us. They're special guys to me. At this time, I would like to call on Gene Hough of Saving Hallowed Ground. Gene, as I mentioned upstairs, is primarily responsible for the restoration of this fountain. And I guess before we do introduce Gene, I would like to unveil this fountain so that you can see what it looks like right now. And for that, I will call on our special guests to help us unveil the fountain. I think Gene and his partners at Saving Hallowed Ground did a great job of restoring this. And in fact, you know, when these proceedings are finished, they will fade from our memories in a matter of weeks, maybe even days. But what will remain as a legacy of these proceedings is this fountain. And Gene and his colleagues have put coats of wax on this fountain so that it will last for some time. We don't know exactly how long, maybe not 100 years, but it certainly should be around in this condition for some time to come. And we can't thank Gene enough for his work on this fountain. All right, at this time we will call on Gene Hough when he is ready.
I would like to read the poem, Flanders Field. Keep in mind, the shelling was horrific. And the soldiers were in the trenches in the field, and many of them had perished. And the result of this horrific shelling, for whatever divine providence, stirred up the seeds of the poppy. And after all the succession of hostilities had taken place, I don't know the exact date, the sprouting of these poppies occurred, and I believe it was a Canadian who came up with this poem. In Flanders Field by Colonel John McCrae. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow, between the crosses, row and row. The mark our place in the sky, larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt down, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field.
Sherry Halderson, one of our volunteers, has poppies. We would like to hand them to volunteers who will help us lay them on the fountain. And at that time, we will call on Gregg Pearson and Dave Jacoby of the VFW, who will read the names of the 26 Doylestownans who fought in World War I but did not return. Gentlemen.
Corporal James A. Dara of Doylestown was killed in action on September 30th, 1918. He was assigned to D Company, 311th Machine Gun Battalion, 79th Division. He is listed on the tablets of the missing. His body was never recovered at the Meuse-Argonne Military Cemetery in France.
Private Frank Holden of Plumsteadville, National Guardsman assigned to F Battery, 108th Field Artillery, 28th Division, killed in action September 17th, 1918, buried in Doylestown Cemetery.
Corporal Paul Hinkle of Philadelphia was born in New Britain. He was killed in action on July 19th, 1918. He was assigned to B Company, 4th Machine Gun Battalion, 2nd Division. He is listed on the tablets of the missing at the Aisne-Marne Military Cemetery in France.
Private First Class Irvin Pearson of Carversville, drafted into C Company, 15th Machine Gun Battalion, 5th Division, killed in action September 13th, 1918, buried in Carversville Cemetery.
Private John F. Pleece of Chalfont died on October 15, 1918. He was assigned to Fort Thomas, Kentucky. He is buried in St. Peter's Union Cemetery, Hilltown.
Private Wilson S. Rosenberger of Chalfont, drafted into H Company, 316th Infantry, 79th Division, died of disease on October 18, 1918, buried in St. Peter's Union Cemetery, Hilltown.
Private Floyd E. Ruth of Doylestown died on October 24, 1918. He was assigned to A Company, 316th Infantry, 79th Division. His body was returned to the United States and reburied in Lansdale Cemetery.
Private First Class Norman D. Rodenbach of Philadelphia, enlisted into L Company, 26th Infantry, 1st Division, died of wounds on June 14, 1918, buried in Arlington National Cemetery.
Private Raymond C. Weissel of Warrington died on October 21, 1918. He is buried in Pleasantville United Church of Christ Cemetery.
Private Mark A. McCooney of Doylestown, National Guardsman assigned to M Company, 110th Infantry, 28th Division, killed in action July 30th, 1918. He is listed on the tablets of the missing. His body was never recovered.
The following fallen soldiers were members of Company G, 111th Infantry Regiment, 28th Division. Sergeant Albert R. Atkinson, Jr. of Doylestown was killed in action September 7th, 1918. He was assigned to G Company, 111th Infantry. His body was returned to the United States and is buried in Doylestown Cemetery.
Corporal Edward Doyle, Jr. of Yardley, killed in action September 7th, 1918. He is listed on the tablets of the missing. His body was never recovered.
Private First Class William H. Eckert of Quakertown died of wounds on September 11th, 1918. He was assigned to Headquarters Company, 111th Infantry. His body was returned to the United States and was reburied in Union Cemetery, Quakertown.
Sergeant George Warren Freiling of Doylestown, killed in action September 26, 1918, buried in St. Luke's UCC Cemetery in Dublin.
Corporal John W. Frackenthal of Doylestown died of wounds on September 8, 1918. His body was returned to the United States and was reburied in Union Cemetery, Regalsville.
Private Raymond W. Good of Jenkintown died of wounds on September 17, 1918. He's buried in France.
Private H. Walter Harvey of New Britain died of wounds on August 25, 1918. His body was returned to the United States and was reburied in Beulah Cemetery, New Britain.
Sergeant Frank S. Hawksworth of Doylestown, killed in action October 7th, 1918, buried in Doylestown Cemetery.
Private Warren Keyser of Doylestown was killed in action on September 7th, 1918. His burial site is unknown.
Sergeant Raymond S. Long of Doylestown, killed in action September 29th, 1918, buried in Doylestown Cemetery.
Private Maurice Lazar of Philadelphia was killed in action on August 11th, 1918. His body was returned to the United States and was reburied in Kilhalath, Israel, Hebrew Cemetery, Shenandoah Heights, Pennsylvania.
Corporal Harry Large of Doylestown, killed in action October 6, 1918. He's buried in France.
Private First Class John J. Moorman of Doylestown was killed in action on October 4th, 1918. He is buried in the Meuse Argonne Military Cemetery in France.
Private First Class Wallace Poole of Doylestown, killed in action September 6, 1918, also buried in France.
Private James C. Redding of Doylestown was killed in action October 8, 1918. He is listed on the Tablets of the Missing at the Meuse Argonne Military Cemetery in France.
And finally, Private First Class George R. Wood of Point Pleasant, killed in action September 7th, 1918, also buried in France.
Thank you, fellas. Ladies and gentlemen, taps was sounded by Gregg Seltzer of the Quakertown Band, soon to be Private Marine Corps Gregg Seltzer. And I will mention again that the bugle he is using belonged to this man right here, the man on the bottom, who was the bugler of Company G, and that bugle, along with his uniform, fell to John Hartzel, one of our special guests, who graciously loaned it to us for this occasion. Thank you very much, John. And in conclusion, I would like to thank once again all of our volunteers, those people who participated in this ceremony, and all of you for attending, and whoever I have to thank for the skies opening up and making this event possible. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.